Have you ever witnessed a moment where in just a few seconds, everything turned upside down? A successful and calm black female CEO just entered the VIP cabin, was kicked out of the seat she had paid for because a more important white passenger wanted to sit there. No one spoke up. No one asked why. And in the most humiliating moment, she just kept quiet, then stood up. But what no one knew was the moment she had to choose between her old pain and the truth she had buried for many years. Should she fight back or stay quiet and let the storm pass? If you were standing there under the cold gaze of the entire VIP cabin, what would you do? Would you be calm enough not to collapse? Would you have the courage to face the injustice right in front of you? Today's story is not about who is right and who is wrong. It allows each of us to look at ourselves at the moment we are silent in the face of injustice and ask, have I ever been treated like this? We invite you to join this emotional journey. If you are ready, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to start the story with us. The late afternoon sun spilled through the tall windows of Hawthorne Field's private terminal, laying long stripes of gold across the polished floor. The sound inside was calm, almost gentle rolling luggage wheels, a distant coffee machine steaming, a soft piano playlist humming from speakers near the lounge. Nothing in that peaceful space hinted that a storm was about to break open in the next few minutes. Dr. Eliana Grant stepped through the sliding doors quietly, dressed in a charcoal gray business suit tailored just enough to show refinement without drawing attention. She carried nothing but a slim leather laptop bag and a calmness that had grown inside her over many years. At 45, she had weathered enough storms to know how to keep her face steady even when her heart sighed. Her flight that day was supposed to be uneventful, a short hop from Los Angeles to Denver for a final meeting with federal partners before announcing Nexus Core Global's largest expansion yet. A deal that had taken 3 years of negotiation, a deal that would shape communities, jobs, and technology across half the country. This day should have felt like a triumph. Yet for some reason, as she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, a thin thread of hesitation stirred in her chest. A quiet voice, familiar and heavy. Please let this be an easy day. She smiled politely, though, wished the agent a good afternoon. Walked toward the jet bridge. Did everything that a seasoned executive would do to keep her dignity tucked close. Years had taught her to prepare for moments others didn't have to think about. The cabin lights on Flight 219 were soft and warm, like a living room someone cared enough to decorate with intention. Only 8 seats in the VIP section, arranged in 2 neat rows of wide leather recliners. The kind of seating where people usually exhaled their stress with the first sip of sparkling water. Eliana looked at seat 2A, her assigned seat. She gently brushed a hand along the top of it, feeling the cool texture of the leather. She placed her bag beneath the seat and sat, taking a deep breath as the weight of the day slowly eased from her shoulders. But that moment of quiet did not last long. A sharp voice cut through the softness of the cabin. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to move." The words weren't loud, they weren't shouted, but they carried the unmistakable edge of someone who believed she had the authority to place people where she saw fit. The kind of tone that slid beneath the skin before a person even had time to fully hear it. Eliana blinked, raising her eyes. A woman in her early 40s stood in the aisle, blonde hair pulled tight into a bun, uniform pressed flat as if steamed minutes ago, posture stiff with rehearsed superiority. Her name tag read, Melanie Rudd, Chief Flight Attendant. Eliana offered a small, warm smile. Is something wrong? Melanie didn't smile back, not even a faint twitch. Instead, she pointed at the seat with a clipped, irritated motion. This seat is reserved for VIP travelers. You'll need to relocate to the back of the aircraft. Immediately. The word immediately landed like a drop of cold water. Eliana kept her voice soft. I believe this is the seat listed on my boarding pass. Melanie didn't even look. She let out a breath through her nose fast, impatient, the kind of breath that said, I've already decided who you are, the kind that said you don't belong here and I don't need to check anything to know that. You'll need to move, Melanie repeated, leaning slightly closer. Let's not make this uncomfortable for everyone. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The plane hummed softly, the overhead vents whispering cool air. A young couple in the row behind pretended to look at their phones, though their eyes kept flicking upward. An older man across the aisle paused mid-sip of his water, watching carefully. Eliana felt that quiet, familiar tightening in her chest. A memory, a pattern, a story she had lived before in other rooms, other airports, other board meetings. She could almost hear her mother's voice from years ago, wrapping around her. They'll see your skin first. Baby, but you don't have to let that be the end of the story. Eliana reached into her blazer pocket and retrieved her boarding pass slowly, so as not to escalate anything. She held it out, steady and polite. Here you go. Seat 2A. Melanie glanced at the ticket for maybe half a second, barely enough to register the numbers before shaking her head. This section, she said, tapping the headrest with a manicured nail, is not for passengers like you. A silence fell so sudden and sharp, it felt like the air itself froze. The young woman behind Eliana stiffened. The older man lowered his glass with a small, stunned clink. Even the soft piano music from the speakers seemed too gentle for a moment like this. Eliana's breath caught, but only for a heartbeat. She lifted her chin a little. Not aggressively, just enough to reclaim the air around her. Passengers like me, she repeated softly. Melanie lifted her brows as if Eliana had asked a foolish question. Yes, this seating is for high-tier business travelers, executives, long-standing partners, people who well fit the expectations of this cabin. The last part was whispered, not because she was ashamed, because she didn't want to face the reaction if she said it any louder. Eliana let her hands rest on her lap. Slowly, calmly, she could feel the weight of every eye in the VIP cabin pressing onto her shoulders. Inside, something warm and painful stirred beneath her ribs, the kind of ache that comes from a wound healed too many times. But her voice, when she spoke, still felt steady. I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. Melanie's lips curled, not quite a smile, not quite a sneer. We'll see about that. She straightened her uniform, snapped the boarding pass between her fingers as though claiming authority, and turned sharply toward the front of the aircraft. The tension she left behind hung like a storm cloud. The young woman behind Eliana exhaled shakily. The older man looked uncomfortable, then quickly looked away, pretending not to have witnessed anything at all. Eliana pressed her palm to her knee, not in fear, but to steady the simmering exhaustion rising in her chest. Not again. Not today. She gazed toward the front of the cabin where Melanie vanished behind the galley curtain. Somewhere deeper inside, beneath all the professionalism and patience, a quiet whisper formed. How many times must we prove ourselves outside the window? The sun dipped lower, warming the cabin with a soft glow so gentle it almost clashed with the bitterness blooming in the air. And that was how it began. The curtain at the front of the cabin rustled lightly as Melanie disappeared behind it. The soft click of the metal clasp settling back into place felt strangely final, as though a door had closed not just on her attitude, but on something older and deeper that had followed Eliana all her life. For a brief moment, the airplane hummed in a calm that did not match the tension in Eliana's chest. She sat still in Seat 2A, her hands folded neatly, her breathing controlled as if she were back in a meditation room she used to visit during her early executive years. Even now, she tried to slow her pulse, to keep her thoughts from scattering into places she did not want to revisit. But that one sentence, that one tiny wedge of judgment, pierced more memories than she intended to unlock. Passengers continued boarding farther back. Their voices blended into a blur of indistinct conversation. Bags thumped overhead. Someone laughed lightly as if nothing in the world could be wrong in this moment. Life carried on with its usual rhythm, unaware of the quiet earthquake that had just rippled through one woman's day. Eliana closed her eyes for a second. Just one. Enough to let herself breathe without being watched. And then the past rose. Not in images at first, in feelings. a heaviness, a familiar vulnerability that did not belong to a woman who had built a global corporation, who sat across from senators and billionaires, who shaped new technology frameworks for the country. This vulnerability belonged to a girl who grew up in South Dallas. She could still smell the dry summer dust that blew across the neighborhood each afternoon. She could see the uneven sidewalk outside her childhood home. A small house with chipped paint but a warm kitchen, always filled with the scent of cornbread and sweet tea. Her mother's laughter drifting from the kitchen window. That house had been a sanctuary where love was strong enough to hold back the world's sharp edges. She remembered being 9 years old, standing in line at a grocery store, holding a carton of milk. The cashier questioning if she was in the right lane. She remembered the woman behind her whispering something about these people. Not loud, but loud enough. She remembered her mother placing a firm, warm hand on her shoulder, turning her gently. "Look at me," her mother had said softly. "You are not small. Do not let them make you smaller." She remembered being 16, walking home from school in a crisp uniform she ironed herself. A patrol car slowing beside her. Two officers asking where she was going, what she was carrying, why she walked alone in this neighborhood. She remembered clutching her worn textbook tightly, her voice trembling but steady as she said she had just come from the library. She remembered the officers exchanging a glance that said everything. She remembered her first job interview, sitting in a bright office lobby in Houston, the receptionist handing her a clipboard without looking up, assuming she was there to apply for a clerical position, though she had come with a graduate degree in data systems engineering. She remembered being introduced to a panel that looked at her as though she had walked into the wrong room. She remembered the polite smile she forced herself to wear anyway. And now, here she was, decades later, sitting in a VIP seat on an aircraft partially owned by her own corporation. And a flight attendant had looked at her face, her skin, her presence, and decided with perfect confidence that she did not belong. It was astonishing. Really, how quickly the years folded in on themselves. How one moment could unravel every carefully built layer of strength a person had placed around their heart. Yet despite that ache, she felt something else rising too. Something steadier. Something her mother had sewn into her spirit the same way she had sewn patches onto Eliana's school uniform whenever it tore. The strength to hold her head up. She opened her eyes again. The light in the cabin had changed slightly. The sun outside dipped enough to cast gentle amber tones across the seats. Her reflection on the window looked calm, but she could see the faint tension near her jaw. A reminder that she was human, no matter how far she had climbed. Someone shifted in the row behind her. The older man who had pretended not to see anything earlier cleared his throat. Perhaps he wanted to say something. Perhaps he reconsidered. His silence felt heavy, though Eliana did not resent him. People often chose comfort over courage. She had learned that long ago. A soft voice emerged to her right. "Are you all right?" Eliana turned slightly. A middle-aged woman with warm eyes and silver strands in her dark hair offered her a kind look from a Seat 2B. She had boarded quietly, unnoticed in the tension of earlier. She wore a navy cardigan and held a paperback novel on her lap, her thumb marking her place among its pages. Eliana gave a small nod. "I am fine. Thank you." The woman hesitated, studying her gently. "I saw what happened. It was not right." Eliana offered a faint smile, one that carried gratitude but also exhaustion. "Things like that happen, more often than people realize. That does not make it acceptable," the woman replied. Her voice was soft but firm, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had lived enough life to know the cost of silence. Eliana took a breath, letting the kindness settle in her chest. It did not erase the sting, but it softened it. "You do not have to fight this alone," the woman added. Eliana looked at her for a long moment. Kind strangers were rare treasures in a lifetime of battles. She let her shoulders ease slightly. "Your name?" the woman asked. "Eliana," she replied gently. The woman smiled, as though learning that name meant something. "I am Martha." They nodded at each other with a quiet understanding that did not need many words. Footsteps approached from the aisle. Eliana recognized them even before she fully looked. Quick steps, irritated steps, steps of someone who carried assumptions like a shield. Melanie returned, holding a tablet in one hand and her impatience in the other. Her expression was sharper now, as if annoyance had solidified into certainty. She stopped in front of Eliana and spoke with a tone smoothed by professionalism, yet sharpened by bias. Your ticket is valid, but the seat assignment is not. You will have to move. Martha's eyes widened. She has every right to be here. Melanie ignored her entirely. Eliana breathed in slowly, tasting the familiar metallic edge of conflict rising in the air. She kept her hands folded. She kept her voice steady. I am staying in my assigned seat. Melanie's jaw tightened. Then we will have a problem. There it was again. That unspoken message, that subtle insistence, that assumption tied to a long line of old beliefs. Eliana felt the ache from earlier shift into something firmer. Not anger, just a knowing sadness wrapped in resolve. A lifetime of moments like this had sharpened her understanding of people, but they had also deepened her compassion. She looked up at Melanie with calm, steady eyes. You already created one. Melanie blinked, thrown off by the quiet strength in that sentence. Before she could respond, the curtain to the galley slid open once more. Another presence stepped forward. A taller figure wearing a dark uniform with gold accents and a name badge polished to a shine. It was Captain Raymond Cole. His gaze swept the cabin, settling finally on Eliana. Recognition flickered in his eyes, a hint of something unspoken, something that made Melanie shift uneasily beside him. The moment held its breath. Something was changing, and the story was only beginning. Captain Raymond Cole stood there for a brief moment, his presence filling the narrow aisle with an authority that was firm yet steady. His uniform carried the clean scent of pressed fabric, and the polished wings pinned to his chest seemed to catch a faint glimmer from the overhead lights. But what drew every eye in the cabin was not his appearance. It was the way his gaze softened the instant he recognized Eliana. Is everything all right here? He asked. Voice level, but with an undertone that suggested he already sensed the answer. Melanie straightened her posture. The tension in her shoulders became sharper, almost defensive. Captain, I was addressing a seating issue. It is under control. Captain Cole looked from Melanie to Eliana, taking in the stiffness in the air, the way Martha had set her book aside with quiet concern, the way a couple of passengers farther down the aisle pretended to scroll their phones while listening closely. His voice lowered as he spoke to Eliana. Dr. Grant, ma'am, are you being treated with respect on this flight? The sound of her name on his lips lifted a few eyebrows nearby. A whisper ran through the row behind her, a soft ripple of curiosity. Eliana had felt countless eyes watching her since the moment she boarded. But this was different. Something inside the cabin had shifted. A small, almost imperceptible turn of the atmosphere. Eliana nodded politely. Thank you for your concern, Captain. I believe there may be a misunderstanding. Melanie stepped forward quickly. Captain Cole. I have determined she is in the wrong seat. A different traveler has priority for this section. And you verified this how? Captain Cole asked, without looking away from Eliana. Melanie stiffened. It was obvious. The two words fell heavily into the silence. Captain Cole's expression didn't change, but his eyes cooled slightly. Color drained from Melanie's cheeks, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face. Before he could say more, a man's voice rose from farther back in the cabin. Is there a problem with my seat? The man asked loudly. Heads turned. A tall, broad-shouldered figure strode up the aisle with an air of entitlement that seemed to bend the space around him. His suit was crisp, though the confidence he wore was sharper than anything on his body. His steps held the casual arrogance of someone used to having doors open at every approach. Thomas Langford stopped beside Captain Cole, glancing briefly at him before fixing his eyes on Eliana. That seat is mine. First-class priority. He spoke as though claiming a piece of furniture. Melanie exhaled in visible relief, as though Langford's arrival validated her choices. That is correct. Mr. Langford, she said quickly. Thank you for coming forward. Langford gave her a dismissive nod, then addressed Eliana with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Ma'am, I think you're confused. My company paid extra for that seat. I would appreciate it if you move so we can take off. He spoke softly, but every syllable was coated with condescension. Every word carried the certainty that the world existed to accommodate him. Eliana met his gaze. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shift in her seat. She held her calm the same way one might hold a fragile photograph, gently but firmly. I am in my assigned place, she said simply. Langford laughed lightly, as though she had told a joke. Come on. No need to make this difficult. Something in the way he said it, something in the tilt of his head, stirred an old ache in her. She had met men like him in boardrooms, at conferences, at business dinners where she was the only black woman at the table. Men who listened only to the voices they believed were worth hearing. Martha inhaled quietly beside her. Sir, she has every right to stay where she is. Langford glanced at Martha with mild annoyance, as though swatting aside an unimportant detail. I wasn't addressing you. Captain Cole's voice interrupted the tension. Mr. Langford, the seating manifest is accurate. This passenger is assigned to 2A. Well, then it is incorrect. Langford shot back. Fix it. Melanie stepped closer to him. We are in the process of resolving that. Captain Cole turned toward her slowly. We are not in the process of anything. The passenger stays where her boarding pass places her. Melanie swallowed hard, but the stubbornness in her eyes remained. Captain, with respect, we have discretion over seat management. Discretion, he repeated calmly. Not discrimination. The word dropped into the cabin like a stone into still water. A hush fell over the passengers, thick and watchful. Even the hum of the engines seemed quieter. Langford's expression soured. This is getting ridiculous. He leaned toward Eliana, lowering his voice but not his hostility. You understand how this works? Some of us have earned a certain level of privilege. Some have not. Martha let out a sharp breath. That is enough. Eliana did not flinch, did not look away. Her voice came soft and even. I believe everyone on this plane paid for a safe and respectful experience. Nothing more? Nothing less? Her calmness unsettled Langford more than any raised voice could. He straightened sharply and looked to Melanie. Call security. Melanie nodded, snatching her tablet. Already prepared to. We cannot take off until she moves. A buzz rippled through the rows. The older man behind Eliana lowered his face, conflicted and embarrassed. A younger traveler covertly recorded the standoff from his seat. A murmur of discomfort spread among passengers who now fully understood the truth. This wasn't about a seat. It was about who belonged, and who did not. Eliana clasped her hands in her lap. There was a moment where she felt the edges of doubt creep in, a weariness that came from a lifetime of moments where dignity had to be defended instead of granted. That quiet question from childhood returned. How many times must we prove ourselves? Her spine remained straight. Her face stayed composed, but her eyes softened, reflecting a sorrow she rarely let show. A single breath passed through her lips, slow and steady. Martha, she said quietly. Thank you for speaking up. Martha's voice trembled with conviction. No one should be treated that way. Captain Cole stepped slightly in front of Melanie, forcing her to halt. His tone shifted, no longer neutral. There will be no removal of this passenger. Melanie opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Captain, I was following what I believed to be appropriate protocol. You were following something, he said gently, but not protocol. Langford scoffed loudly. This airline is losing its standards. Captain Cole's eyes narrowed in quiet disapproval, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned his attention back to Eliana. Dr. Grant, I will personally ensure this flight proceeds smoothly for you. A few passengers exchanged surprised looks. Melanie grew very still. Langford blinked twice. Dr. Grant? The title hovered in the cabin air. It carried weight, respect, authority. But Melanie and Langford had not expected to hear it. Eliana inclined her head slightly. Thank you, Captain. Something flickered between them, a recognition of shared history, of past professional encounters. Melanie noticed. Her brows lifted in confusion and her confidence faltered. She looked at Eliana with new uncertainty, as though trying to recalibrate what she thought she knew. Langford shook his head. This is absurd. I want a supervisor, and I want to know why she gets special treatment. Captain Cole's voice remained calm. You will have all the answers you are looking for. He turned away, motioning for Melanie to follow him toward the galley. She hesitated, torn between obedience and indignation, but the authority in his stride left no room for argument. As they stepped behind the curtain, the cabin felt strangely quiet. The passengers watched, waiting for what would unfold next. The energy shifted from judgment to anticipation, from misunderstanding to unraveling truth. Eliana sat still, her breathing steady once more. The storm had begun its turn, and deep inside, she felt the faint stir of something old and powerful. A reminder that truth always finds its way to the surface. The curtain slid shut behind Captain Cole and Melanie with a soft flutter, leaving the cabin wrapped in a silence that felt heavier than before. Even the soft hum of circulating air seemed quieter, as if the aircraft itself sensed the tension lingering in every row. The passengers looked forward, then looked down, then looked at each other, unsure whether to speak or keep their thoughts tucked away. Eliana breathed in slowly. She rested her fingertips against the armrest, grounding herself in the simple contact of fabric beneath her skin. Her gaze drifted toward the window again, where the glow of the setting sun cast long strokes of color over the airport tarmac. The warm tones eased some of the weight inside her chest. Martha sat beside her in stillness, hands folded over the paperback she had abandoned pages earlier. She kept glancing toward the front curtain, then at Eliana, as though afraid of overstepping, yet unwilling to stay silent. Finally, Martha leaned slightly closer. You handled that with remarkable grace, she said in a voice barely above a whisper. Eliana offered a gentle smile. Sometimes grace is the only thing that keeps a person from falling apart. Martha's expression softened in understanding. People like them rely on others staying quiet. You didn't. A small breath escaped Eliana, warm but weary. I have spent many years choosing my battles very carefully. Some days feel heavier than others. Martha didn't pry. She simply nodded, carrying the kind of empathy that didn't need explanation. Farther back, Thomas Langford spoke loudly enough for several rows to hear. This is why airlines lose loyal customers. No standards anymore. No accountability. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, but no one engaged him. His voice washed unpleasantly across the cabin, grating like a dull blade dragged across metal. One of the younger travelers whispered to his friend, keeping his voice low, if she had been a different color, none of this would have happened. The friend nodded, eyes fixed on the curtain where the confrontation had vanished moments earlier. The observation hung in the air, delicate and painful. Eliana heard it, though she didn't turn. The truth, spoken quietly by strangers, often cut the deepest. She let her eyes close briefly, just enough to gather herself. A few minutes passed, though they felt longer in the strained quiet. More passengers settled into their seats. Overhead bins thudded shut with finality. The boarding door closed with a muted click that normally signaled a routine beginning. But today it felt like a warning. Something was building. Something inevitable. Footsteps approached from the back of the plane. Not hurried, not slow. a measured cadence that suggested someone doing his job while carrying the weight of uncertainty. It was Carter Hayes, the head of onboard security. He appeared at the edge of the VIP section, a tall figure with a calm presence and observant eyes. His posture was relaxed, but the way he scanned the cabin revealed he knew exactly what had been unfolding, even if he hadn't witnessed it directly. He stepped closer to Eliana's seat. "Ma'am, may I speak with you for a moment?" Eliana nodded, looking up at him steadily. "Of course," Carter lowered his voice. "Captain Cole informed me there may have been a disagreement earlier." Martha leaned toward him. It was more than a disagreement. She was mistreated. Carter acknowledged her with a slight nod before turning his attention back to Eliana. "I want to be sure you feel safe on this flight," he said. "If anything else concerns you, I am here." His sincerity was evident. Beneath the trained neutrality of his professional tone lay genuine concern. Eliana appreciated that. "Thank you. Officer Hayes, I am all right. If the situation escalates again, please let me know," he added. She nodded once more, her voice warm though subdued. "I will." As Carter stepped back, his gaze flicked to the curtain separating them from the flight attendant's area. It lingered there a moment too long, as if he sensed unrest brewing behind the fabric. Then he turned and walked toward the back, continuing his checks. After he left, Martha exhaled. "He seems reasonable. He is doing his best." Eliana replied quietly. "Many people do, even within systems that make it difficult." Martha looked at her thoughtfully. "You speak like someone who has had to stay strong for a long time." Eliana smiled gently. "Life teaches us in ways we do not always expect." The cabin brightened slightly as the overhead lights adjusted for evening. A few passengers pulled out books. A baby cried briefly before being comforted. The ordinary rhythm of travel tried to settle back into place. But peace had not returned. Not really. It hovered, fragile and uncertain. And behind the curtain at the front of the cabin, muffled voices surfaced, rising and falling like distant waves. Melanie's sharper tone clashed with Captain Cole's deeper, composed responses. No words could be distinguished, but the tension seeped through the fabric. A faint unease gripped Eliana's stomach. She did not fear conflict, but she feared the weight of repetition, the exhaustion of fighting battles that should not exist anymore. She adjusted her posture, allowing her back to settle into the leather seat. Her fingers brushed the edge of her blazer sleeve, grounding herself through something familiar. Her mind drifted, not into the past this time, but into the years she had spent building Nexus Core Global, the late nights drafting proposals, the countless meetings where she was the only woman of color in the room, the quiet resistance she met, not through overt hostility, but through doubts disguised as questions. "Are you sure you're ready for such a large role, Dr. Grant? Wouldn't a less visible project be more appropriate? Maybe we should consider someone with a more traditional background." Traditional? That word again. A door that had always been easier for others to walk through. Yet she had persisted. She had risen. She had proven her worth not by outshouting others, but by understanding the rooms she entered and shaping her presence within them. Now here she was, a successful CEO, a respected leader, a woman who commanded influence far beyond this aircraft, and still one person's bias had tried to shrink her. If she allowed herself to dwell on that, the sadness might deepen. Instead, she inhaled slowly, reminding herself of her mother's teachings. Every day offers a choice: become bitter or become better. Her eyes opened again. The curtain rustled suddenly. Melanie emerged, her expression flushed and rigid. Her steps were clipped, betraying her frustration. She avoided Eliana's eyes entirely as she moved briskly down the aisle, greeting passengers with forced politeness. A few seconds later, Captain Cole followed. His face was composed, but something in his demeanor had shifted. He paused at the front of the VIP section, scanning each face as though searching for someone he needed to address. Finally, his gaze found Eliana. He approached with measured steps. "Dr. Grant," he said quietly, but loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "May I speak with you for a moment?" She nodded calmly. The passengers leaned in subtly. Even Langford straightened with interest, though his expression remained taut with entitlement. Captain Cole lowered his voice. "We are working through the issue. I appreciate your patience." Eliana studied him for a moment. The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. He looked like a man caught between protocol and conscience, navigating a situation he wished had never arisen. "I understand," she said softly. "Thank you." His shoulders relaxed slightly, as though her composure steadied something inside him. "I will be making an announcement shortly," he added. "It may clarify matters." Eliana held his gaze. "Do what you must." He nodded respectfully, then stepped back toward the front, preparing to address the cabin. Martha whispered, "Something is coming." Eliana watched Captain Cole's back, a faint unease curling in her stomach. She could feel it, too. The truth was beginning to surface, and the air inside the cabin felt charged with the weight of what would follow. The overhead chime rang softly, signaling the aircraft's transition into pre-departure procedures. Yet nothing about the moment felt routine. Captain Cole stood at the front of the VIP cabin, one hand resting lightly on the frame of the galley doorway, the other clasped behind his back. His presence drew the attention of every passenger. Though he had not yet spoken a word, Eliana could sense his hesitation, the kind that comes when a leader knows the truth must be spoken, but also knows it will disrupt the fragile quiet around them. She recognized the weight in his shoulders. Leaders often carried burdens others never saw. Martha leaned closer to Eliana and whispered, "He looks troubled." Eliana nodded gently. Trouble often precedes clarity. As she said it, the curtain behind Captain Cole shifted ever so slightly. Melanie stood partially hidden, her face pale beneath the precise layers of makeup she wore. She kept her chin high, but the tightness around her eyes betrayed anxiety. Langford settled impatiently into the aisle seat nearby. He tapped his fingers against the armrest, his irritation building with every passing second. "Are we finally taking off?" he muttered loudly enough for his voice to carry. Captain Cole did not turn toward him. Instead, he addressed the entire cabin with a calm, steady tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Before we prepare for departure, I need to clarify an issue brought to my attention." His voice rolled through the cabin, neither booming nor soft, but unmistakably controlled. Passengers straightened in their seats, sensing the gravity hidden beneath his even delivery. Eliana folded her hands in her lap. She felt the shift, a quiet anticipation, fragile as a held breath. Captain Cole continued, "It appears there has been confusion regarding seat assignments in the VIP section." Martha frowned. "Confusion," she murmured. "That is one way to say it." Captain Cole glanced toward the curtain behind him. Melanie's eyes darted away. Eliana sensed something stirring deeper beneath his words. She had seen similar tones used in boardrooms when difficult truths were being prepared, softened, shaped for public consumption. But sincerity lay beneath this version. A desire to be fair. He turned back to the passengers. "All boarding passes have been confirmed. Seat 2A belongs to Dr. Eliana Grant." Several passengers exchanged glances. A murmur filled the cabin, low enough to avoid outright gossip, but clear in sentiment. Affirmation, recognition, and something more hidden. Relief that the uncomfortable moment might be nearing resolution. Langford shook his head and scoffed. "Unbelievable. We are delaying an entire cabin because someone cannot follow simple seating rules." Martha shot him a sharp glance. It is not her who caused the delay. Langford ignored her, looking instead to Captain Cole. "Can we please move forward? I have an important schedule. I paid for priority." Captain Cole's expression hardened just slightly. "Mr. Langford, your needs will be addressed, but respect is expected from all passengers." Langford leaned back, muttering something about unprofessionalism. Captain Cole shifted his attention once more. I want to thank those who remained patient during this misunderstanding. Melanie stepped out from behind the curtain, holding her chin high. Captain, if I may speak with you privately? He did not turn. Not now. The brief exchange silenced the whispers. Melanie's cheeks darkened as she retreated slightly. Eliana felt a quiet ache in her chest. She had never wished humiliation on anyone, not even those who wronged her. But consequences had their own gravity, and they arrived whether a person wanted them or not. As Captain Cole prepared to make the final part of his statement, the intercom crackled overhead, interrupting him. A voice from the cockpit spoke with a sense of urgency. Captain Cole, we need you up front. He responded immediately, on my way. He gave the cabin a respectful nod before disappearing through the cockpit door. What remained was a fragile quiet, pulsing through the rows like an unspoken question mark. Melanie emerged fully now, stepping into the aisle with forced authority. Ladies and gentlemen, please prepare for departure. Ensure all personal items are stowed. Her voice wavered on the final word, though she tried to mask it beneath brisk professionalism. She turned toward Eliana with a tight smile, as though attempting to reclaim control. We will be asking you to move once the captain returns. Martha nearly rose from her seat. He already clarified her assignment. Why are you persisting? Melanie's gaze sharpened. Ma'am, please keep your tone civil. I am doing my job. That is not what it looks like. Martha replied firmly. Melanie's jaw clenched. I will not tolerate disrespect from passengers. Eliana placed a gentle hand on Martha's arm. It is all right, she said softly. Martha's voice softened. It is not. Eliana met Melanie's eyes. What exactly is unresolved? Melanie hesitated, then pulled her tablet closer to her chest. There is a VIP protocol. There are expectations. I have to follow them. Eliana spoke without raising her voice, but the protocol should be followed equally. Melanie flinched at the quiet truth embedded in those words. Her eyes flickered with something unsteady. For the first time since the conflict began, her confidence wavered in a way that seemed almost personal. Behind her, Langford rose. He stood tall, straightening his suit jacket with a practiced sweep. His presence filled the small aisle, not just physically, but with the heavy air of entitlement. He moved closer to Eliana's seat and spoke with an infuriating calm. Look, let's be reasonable. We both know how these things usually work. Eliana's eyebrows lifted slightly. How do they usually work? Langford smiled in a way that carried no warmth. You move quietly. I sit where I am supposed to. And we avoid all this unnecessary drama. Unnecessary drama. The words carried a deep sting. Eliana felt Martha stiffen beside her. Langford sighed, as if explaining something to a stubborn child. My position grants me certain privileges. I am simply asking you to respect the system. Eliana studied him, her face unreadable. And what system is that? The one that keeps order? He replied simply. Martha let out a soft, incredulous breath. Order, she echoed. Is that what you call it? Langford did not look at Martha. He kept his eyes fixed on Eliana, confident in his assumption that the conversation belonged only to him. You do not look like someone who belongs in this section, he said quietly. And that is just the truth. Something inside Eliana tightened, not in anger but in recognition. She had seen this posture before, this tone, this certainty born from ignorance rather than understanding. She leaned back in her seat, her voice calm and clear. I belong wherever I choose to be, as long as I have earned my place. Langford laughed under his breath. Earned. Interesting word choice? Before he could continue, the cockpit door opened again. Captain Cole returned, but now there was something resolute in his eyes. Something final. He walked straight to the front of the VIP cabin, "Mr. Langford," he said, voice crisp. Langford turned with an irritated sigh. "What now?" "Please return to your seat. We are about to make final preparations." Langford hesitated, then slowly stepped back, still glaring in Eliana's direction as he retreated down the aisle. Captain Cole faced the VIP section. He looked at Melanie, then at the passengers, then at Eliana for a long, steady moment. "In a few minutes," he said, "I will be making a full announcement." Martha inhaled softly, sensing something approaching. Eliana's heart beat once, slow and steady. Melanie froze mid-step. Langford paused halfway into his aisle. Whatever was coming next had the power to shift the entire course of the flight, and every passenger knew it. The cabin settled into a stillness that felt strangely heavy, as if the very air had paused to listen. Captain Cole's footsteps faded toward the cockpit once more, leaving behind a space charged with unspoken tension. Every passenger sensed that whatever announcement he intended to make was going to challenge the fragile balance that had been rattled moments earlier. Eliana rested her palms gently against her knees, grounding herself the way she had learned long before success entered her life. She closed her eyes briefly, letting her breath settle in her chest. She did not fear the conflict unfolding around her, but she felt the ache of it, the way exclusion always carried a quiet sting no matter how much strength a person gained over time. Martha leaned close, her voice low but warm. "How are you holding up?" Eliana opened her eyes. "Some days require more patience than others." "You have shown more patience than anyone should need to," Martha said softly. Eliana gave a faint, almost nostalgic smile. "I learned patience before I learned power." Meanwhile, Melanie stood rigidly near the galley partition. Her tablet trembled slightly in her hand, though her expression remained carefully composed. The thin veneer of authority she tried to project was beginning to show cracks, as if the truth beneath her rehearsed professionalism threatened to surface. She glanced toward Langford, who sat with his jaw clenched, tapping his foot with restless irritation. The arrogance he had displayed earlier still clung to him, but now it was laced with unease. Something about Captain Cole's tone had unsettled him. He straightened his suit jacket again, as though fabric could shield him from accountability. Melanie cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are coordinating with the cockpit and expect an update shortly." Her voice wavered the slightest bit, and that small quiver did not go unnoticed. From a few rows back, an older gentleman adjusted his glasses and whispered to his partner, "I think the flight crew is dealing with more than a simple seating issue." His partner nodded. "It is deeper than that. You can feel it." Eliana stared at the front of the cabin. She could sense the pivot point coming, the moment where hidden truths would start to surface. And yet, her heart was calm. She had faced boardrooms filled with executives who underestimated her. She had stood before investors who doubted that a black woman could build an empire in a field dominated by tradition. She had walked through all of it with the same quiet conviction she carried now. What weighed on her was not fear, but sadness for how deeply prejudice could root itself into ordinary routines. Then the curtain parted again. Carter stepped into the cabin with an energy entirely different from Melanie's. His eyes carried a kind of thoughtful seriousness, as if he had spent the last minute wrestling with something difficult. He scanned the room, his gaze lingering on Langford, then on Melanie, then finally settling on Eliana. He approached slowly, not with authority but with genuine concern. "Dr. Grant," he asked gently, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Eliana nodded. "Of course," Martha frowned with protective instinct. "Do you need her to move again? Because I will not sit quietly if this is another attempt to displace her." Carter held up both hands, palms open. "No, ma'am. Nothing like that. I just need to ask a question." Martha hesitated, then leaned back, though the tension in her shoulders remained. Carter lowered his voice. "Dr. Grant, earlier you mentioned that your travel arrangements were confirmed directly through your team. Would you mind clarifying one detail for me? Eliana turned slightly, offering him her full attention. What detail? Carter's expression softened. Did your booking include access to the VIP tier for this flight segment? Before she could answer, Melanie stepped forward quickly. Carter, you do not need to question her. I already reviewed the manifest. He looked at her, then back at Eliana. I just want to be accurate. Eliana exhaled slowly. Yes, my assistant confirmed everything 3 days ago. She even sent me the internal clearance badge. Carter's eyes widened a touch. Internal clearance badge. Melanie stiffened. Carter, you must be remembering incorrectly. She is not on the internal roster. Carter tapped the side of his head thoughtfully. Except, I heard the captain say earlier that her name rang a bell. Strongly? Melanie's voice sharpened. We must maintain protocol. You know this. Carter glanced at her again. I also know that protocol requires fairness. There it was. The first real fracture between the two crew members. A ripple went through the cabin. Even Langford stopped tapping his foot. Melanie stepped closer to Carter, lowering her voice. Do not undermine me in front of passengers. Carter's voice stayed steady. I am trying to make sure we do not escalate a mistake. Melanie's throat tightened. For a moment, she looked almost lost, as if she were trying to cling to a structure that was collapsing beneath her. Eliana felt a quiet pang of empathy. She knew what fear looked like when it disguised itself as authority. Carter returned his attention to her. Dr. Grant, if you have that clearance badge, even on your phone, it would help settle this. Before Eliana could answer, Langford finally rose again. This is absurd, he declared, his voice carrying down the cabin. We have spent far too long entertaining this. She does not belong in this section, clearance badge or not. Passengers watched him carefully. Some bristled at his tone. Langford continued. You are delaying people who actually contribute to this airline. People who matter. Carter shot him a warning glance. Sir, I need you to remain respectful. Langford ignored him completely. I have flown with this company for years. Never once did I see someone like her sitting up here. You are letting sentiment cloud your judgment. Melanie closed her eyes briefly, as if the words cut deeper than he intended. Eliana did not stand. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at Langford with a calmness that silenced even Martha beside her. Someone like me, she repeated quietly. What exactly does that mean? Langford scoffed. You know what I mean. I want to hear you say it. Eliana replied. The cabin went silent. Even the faint hum of the ventilation system seemed to recede. Langford hesitated, not expecting to be challenged so directly. His lips parted, but no words came. Something in Eliana's steady gaze held him frozen in place. She spoke again, even softer. Sometimes the truth reveals more about the speaker than the target. Langford blinked. His posture faltered. Carter stepped closer to him. Sir, you need to sit down. Langford took a slow breath, his confidence cracking just enough to show the fear beneath. After a tense moment, he stepped away and returned to his seat, though his face burned with frustration. Melanie watched the exchange with a subtle tremor in her jaw. She clutched her tablet tighter, her shoulders lifting as though bracing against a wave. Eliana finally spoke to Carter. I can show the clearance badge, but I want you to ask the real question. Carter's eyebrows pulled together. Which question? The one Captain Cole is going to raise in his announcement? Carter swallowed hard. Dr. Grant, what do you mean? Eliana folded her hands again, her voice quiet but certain. The question of why this happened in the first place? Melanie flinched. Langford stared at his hands. Even the older couple in the back exchanged a knowing look. Carter breathed out slowly, the weight of her words settling onto him. I understand. At that moment, the cockpit door opened once more. Captain Cole stepped into the cabin, his presence filling the space with a finality that made every passenger straighten. He met Eliana's eyes first, then Melanie's, then Langford's. "We are going to address this now," he said. And the cabin fell into a silence so deep, it carried the echo of truth long before the first word was spoken. Captain Cole stood at the front of the cabin with a presence so composed that even the most restless passengers felt themselves settle. He took a slow breath, not to steady himself, but to prepare the room for the words he was about to deliver. His eyes swept across the faces before him, lingering briefly on Eliana, then shifting toward Melanie, whose posture had turned noticeably rigid. Finally, they paused on Langford, who looked as though he wanted to sink backward into his seat and vanish. "Thank you all for your patience," Captain Cole began, his voice calm and unforced. "Before we continue toward departure, there's something I need to clarify for everyone on board." A soft murmur rippled through the passengers. Some leaned forward slightly, others held their breath without realizing it. Eliana simply waited, her palms warm against her lap. She felt the room's tension gathering like a low tide pulling back before a rising wave. Captain Cole continued. "An incident occurred during the boarding process. One that has raised questions about protocol, fairness, and conduct." Melanie's throat tightened, and she lowered her gaze toward the carpet. Her fingers dug into the edges of her tablet, knuckles paling with strain. Langford frowned and shifted uncomfortably in his seat, though he forced his expression into something that resembled indifference. Captain Cole's voice softened but grew firmer. "Before addressing the specifics, I must say this. Every passenger on this flight deserves equal respect, equal dignity, equal adherence to the rules that govern our work." Martha exhaled, a quiet breath of vindication. Carter nodded discreetly, as though he had been waiting for those particular words. Captain Cole looked down for a moment, as if choosing each syllable with care. When he lifted his gaze again, his tone deepened. "Seat 2A was assigned to Dr. Eliana Grant. It was correctly booked, correctly verified, and correctly registered in our internal system." Gasps fluttered around the cabin. Melanie closed her eyes, the truth landing heavier than she had anticipated. Langford's jaw tightened, though his eyes flickered with something nearing panic. Captain Cole went on. "Despite this, Dr. Grant was removed from her seat without valid justification. Now the entire cabin was absolutely silent. Eliana remained still, listening, absorbing, waiting. Captain Cole's words grew more pointed. This removal was not due to system error, nor passenger confusion, nor a last-minute change in flight arrangements. He paused. Melanie's breathing grew shallow. Langford swallowed hard. The moment stretched like a held note. Then Captain Cole said the thing no one expected him to say so directly. It happened because an employee made a decision based on personal bias rather than policy. This time, the reaction was immediate. Shock, disbelief, a few sharp inhales, a couple of whispered exclamations. Some passengers stared at Melanie with dawning comprehension. Others turned toward Eliana with apologies softening their expressions. Eliana's eyes did not widen. Her expression did not shift. She had lived long enough to know that truth sometimes arrived like this, steady and unceremonious, slipping into the open air whether people were ready or not. Melanie stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Captain, please let me explain. I followed the procedure, but there was confusion with the roster." "I thought, Melanie," Captain Cole said gently, "you crossed a line today, and it was not simply a misunderstanding." Her lower lip trembled. She tried to steady herself. "I did what I believed was right." "Did you?" he asked softly. Her chin wavered, but she said nothing. Captain Cole looked at her with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "I have reviewed the internal logs. I have spoken with dispatch. I have also checked the timestamps." Melanie's face blanched as though blood had drained from it. He continued, his tone still even. "Dr. Grant's clearance badge was confirmed 30 minutes before boarding began. The system reflected it. Yet you told both Mr. Langford and other passengers that her name was not on the VIP list. Melanie shook her head sharply. A reflexive denial. Captain, I did not mean. But it happened, he said quietly. Melanie froze, her eyes filling with something sharp and raw, a mixture of shame and fear. There was a long moment where no one moved. Langford finally spoke, his voice brittle. Let us not act like this is all her fault. Captain Cole, turned toward him with a steady look that silenced him instantly. I have not finished, the captain said calmly. Langford sank back, his bravado evaporating. Captain Cole addressed the cabin again. There was a second layer to this incident, one that concerns the behavior of another passenger. Langford's throat constricted. He pressed a palm against his knee as if bracing himself. The captain continued. Mr. Langford, your remarks during boarding were documented by passengers and heard by crew. A ripple of discomfort moved through the VIP section. Langford opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. You made statements that disrespected not just Dr. Grant, Captain Cole added, but the values this airline is built upon? Langford finally managed to speak. I was frustrated. I said things I should not have. That is correct. Captain Cole interrupted gently. Langford blinked, stunned at the bluntness of the reply. Captain Cole softened his tone. Frustration is understandable. A discrimination is not. Eliana felt something quiet unfold in her chest. Not triumph, not vindication. Something deeper. A recognition that truth, when spoken clearly, held the power to heal even the wounds it exposed. Captain Cole drew a slow breath and faced the passengers fully. This airline does not tolerate biased decisions. It does not tolerate unfair treatment. And it does not tolerate language that diminishes the dignity of any traveler. A wave of nods followed. Melanie's shoulders sagged. She seemed suddenly smaller, no longer wrapped in the armor of authority. Her eyes glistened. Langford stared down at the floor, his fingers curling tightly around the armrests, the tension in his posture revealing the cost of his pride. Carter looked between them, something conflicted flickering behind his eyes. He had always known the airline was not perfect, but seeing the truth exposed so plainly stirred a quiet fire in him. A resolve, a desire to do better. Captain Cole offered the cabin a final statement. I will be stepping aside to complete the formal report. Once that is done, we will decide whether this flight can proceed. I appreciate your patience and your respect. He bowed his head slightly and walked back toward the cockpit. As the door closed behind him, a heavy silence remained. Then, slowly, the emotional pieces of the moment began to shift. Martha reached over and touched Eliana's hand gently. That man said what many are afraid to say. Eliana nodded. Truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it simply arrives. Melanie stepped forward, her voice trembling. Dr. Grant, I want to apologize. Carter watched her carefully, unsure of her sincerity. Melanie's eyes were damp. I thought I was protecting the order of the cabin, but I made a choice I cannot justify. I am truly sorry. Eliana met her gaze quietly. Recognizing a mistake is the first step. What matters is what you choose after. Melanie swallowed, her voice cracking. I do not know how to fix it. Start by understanding why it happened, Eliana replied. Carter exhaled softly, as if grateful someone had finally spoken the truth aloud. Meanwhile, Langford sat motionless, his breath shallow, his eyes unfocused. Eliana turned her head slightly and looked at him. Not with anger, not with pity, but with a quiet understanding born from a lifetime of being underestimated. When he finally lifted his eyes, he found hers waiting. Not accusing, just present. And somehow that made the burden he carried even heavier. The cabin held its breath once more. Because everyone knew. This was only the beginning. The air inside the cabin felt heavier than before. Not oppressive, but thick with the quiet aftermath that follows truth spoken aloud. Passengers settled back into their seats with expressions shaped by contemplation. Some wore discomfort, some relief, some a quiet kind of admiration aimed toward Eliana. The kind of admiration that rises not from grand gestures, but from the strength of someone who stands tall, simply by remaining calm. For a moment, the plane hummed in a soft lull. The kind that often comes before a storm reshapes everything. Eliana let her gaze drift toward the window. Clouds moved slowly across the horizon, soft shapes drifting in a pale sky. There was something comforting in their steady passage, something grounding. She took a slow breath, feeling the weight of what had unfolded sink deeper, not as a burden but as a reminder. Injustice always costs something, even when endured with grace. Martha leaned slightly toward her. You handled all of that with more calm than most people could ever muster. Eliana gave her a gentle smile. Calm is easier than anger. It takes strength to hold that kind of calm. Martha replied. Eliana looked down. It takes practice, and years of learning when to speak and when silence speaks for itself. A few seats away, Melanie stood motionless, her shoulders hunched ever so slightly, the kind of posture that comes from trying not to collapse inward. Shame rested visibly on her, and she clutched her tablet to her chest as if it were the only thing keeping her balanced. She watched Eliana for a long moment, an expression of regret flickering behind her eyes, but she did not approach again. Not yet. Her apology earlier had cost her more courage than she seemed ready to give a second time. Carter stepped closer to her, his voice quiet. You should sit for a moment. Melanie blinked. I cannot. I have duties. You also have limits, he replied. She hesitated, eyes dropping. I do not want to look weak. Carter studied her, a mix of disappointment and compassion in his face. Acknowledging fault is not weakness. It is the only way to grow. Melanie swallowed hard. She nodded without speaking and stepped aside, leaning against the wall for support. From the back of the VIP section, an elderly woman spoke softly to her husband. I hope the company takes this seriously. Her husband nodded. They will have to, not just because of what was said, but because of who she is. The woman looked toward Eliana with a thoughtful expression, a person who knows their worth without needing to prove it. That is rare. In the aisle seat, Langford remained unmoving, his body almost rigid, his hands clasped together in his lap so tightly that the veins in his knuckles rose sharply beneath the skin. He stared ahead, but his eyes weren't fixed on anything in particular. His mind churned beneath the silence. For the first time since boarding, he seemed smaller. The bravado had faded, the entitlement had thinned. What remained was a man caught between the remnants of his pride and the dawning realization of consequences he had not expected. He inhaled deeply, though the breath quivered. After several long seconds, he lifted his head and glanced sideways toward Eliana. She did not meet his eyes, but she didn't need to. Something in the stillness of her posture unsettled him, as though her quiet presence reflected everything he had refused to see in himself. He shifted again, his throat tight, the kind of discomfort that comes from recognizing one's own ugliness. At that moment, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Cole stepped out again. This time, he carried a folder in one hand and a company-issued tablet in the other. His expression was more resolved than before, his intention unmistakable. Every passenger sat up straighter. He moved to the center of the VIP cabin and spoke in a calm, level tone. I have reviewed the full incident. I have spoken with headquarters, and I now have immediate instructions. Melanie's breath caught sharply. Langford's jaw tensed. Carter braced himself. Martha leaned closer to Eliana, whispering, Here it comes. Eliana remained composed, though a faint ache echoed in her chest. She had endured far worse than this flight, but knowing consequences were about to unfold carried its own weight. Captain Cole continued, We cannot depart until this matter is resolved, and as of now, we must proceed with corrective actions. A ripple of tension moved through the cabin. Melanie stepped forward, her voice cracking. Captain, please, I know I made mistakes. I know I crossed lines I should not have crossed, but I have served this airline for years and I have never had a complaint before. Captain Cole looked at her gently. And no one is questioning your years of service. But what happened today broke policy, and it compromised the dignity of a passenger. Melanie's breath trembled. I never intended harm. I just thought, that is the problem. Captain Cole replied quietly. We cannot justify harm because we believe it comes from good intentions. Melanie's shoulders sagged. Tears pooled in her eyes. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying not to cry in front of the cabin. Eliana watched with a soft heaviness. Not joy, not satisfaction, but empathy for someone facing the consequences of their own fear and bias. Captain Cole turned next toward Langford. Mr. Langford, he said with deliberate calm. Langford looked up, his face pale. I understand. I know what I said was wrong. Wrong, Captain Cole repeated softly. It went beyond wrong. Langford swallowed hard. The captain went on. The company cannot remove you mid-flight because we have not taken off yet. But for the purposes of this journey, you will be reassigned to a standard cabin seat. If you refuse, you will be removed from the flight entirely. Gasps scattered across the cabin. Langford looked stunned. Standard cabin. For me? It is the consequence for your actions, Captain Cole said. Langford's mouth opened, then closed. His pride battled visibly with reality. The struggle played out in the small movements of his jaw, the tightening of his shoulders, the tremor in his hands. He finally whispered, Understood. The passengers watched in quiet amazement, some with approval, some with disbelief. Captain Cole stepped back and drew a breath before announcing the final part. As for the crew involved, the company has ordered immediate suspension pending review. Melanie let out a broken sound, not loud, but painful enough that even Langford turned toward her. Eliana felt a weight in her chest, a moral ache. She did not desire anyone's ruin. She only wanted fairness. The captain turned toward her with genuine respect. Dr. Grant, if you wish to file additional reports or decline to travel with this team, we will accommodate your decision. Eliana shook her head gently. Captain, I appreciate your thoroughness, but I want something else. The cabin leaned in. She continued, her voice soft but steady. I want the company to understand that mistakes can turn into lessons, that people can change if given the opportunity to do better. Consequences are necessary, but so is growth. Melanie looked up, tears spilling freely now. Langford stared at Eliana as though seeing her for the first time. Even Captain Cole paused, taken aback by the depth of her composure. Eliana finished with quiet conviction. This should not be about punishment alone. It should be about understanding why things broke and how to rebuild them stronger. Silence held the cabin for a long moment, a silence that felt like healing beginning in small, fragile shapes. A profound quiet settled inside the VIP cabin. It was the kind of quiet that comes after something heavy has been lifted, yet not fully resolved. A pause suspended between consequence and understanding, between hurt and healing, between the kind of justice that punishes and the kind that teaches. Eliana felt that pause in her chest, not like a weight, but like a deep breath lingering before release. Captain Cole stood still after hearing her words, as though absorbing the unexpected grace she offered. His brows softened, and for a brief moment he looked less like a commanding officer and more like a man quietly humbled by another person's strength. Finally, he nodded. Your perspective is remarkable, Dr. Grant, and deeply appreciated. Eliana offered him a small, genuine smile. It is the perspective life gave me, and I learned to grow with it. Carter's eyes flickered with respect. Martha exhaled softly beside Eliana, relief and admiration mingling on her features. But Melanie, she stood frozen. Her tears still fresh, her breathing uneven. There was something raw in her expression. Not defiance, not self-pity. Something closer to breaking open. A realization, perhaps, that her actions had consequences that reached deeper than her job title. No longer hidden by procedure. Her intentions were being examined not by a system, but by a person she had wronged. Langford stared at the floor, the tension in his shoulders slowly unraveling as shame seeped in. He looked older now, not in years but in the weight of having been seen too clearly. His earlier arrogance had drained from him, leaving behind a man who had never expected to face the mirror held up by his own behavior. Passengers whispered softly among themselves, but the tone had changed. Their voices were more mellow, tinged with empathy. This moment had shifted everyone inside it. Captain Cole cleared his throat. Headquarters will take Dr. Grant's request into account. They agree the incident requires correction, but they also recognize the value of allowing people the opportunity to grow from their mistakes. Melanie pressed the back of her hand to her lips, eyes glistening. For the first time since the conflict began, she looked directly at Eliana without fear of being judged. Instead, she looked as though she hoped to be granted even the smallest chance to repair what she had broken. Captain Cole continued. The final decision will come after we land. For now, there will be immediate supervision added to the VIP cabin. Carter will lead until further notice. Carter blinked. Sir, are you sure? Yes, Captain Cole replied warmly. You demonstrated fairness today, and a willingness to listen. Melanie's shoulders dropped, not in defiance, but in surrender. She stepped aside without argument. Langford shifted uncomfortably. Captain, about my reassignment? Yes, the captain answered calmly. You will be escorted to your new seat once we prepare for takeoff. Langford nodded faintly. The pride in him resisted, but the truth was stronger. He knew he had no ground left to stand on. Eliana watched him quietly, not with anger, but with a gentle sadness. She knew what remorse looked like, and she knew that some people needed one moment of being seen at their worst to begin reaching for their better self. Carter stepped forward. Dr. Grant, may I get you anything while we wait? Eliana shook her head. Just a bit of calm. Martha chuckled softly, though worry lingered behind her smile. You deserve more than calm today. I am used to these moments, Eliana replied. Martha leaned closer. You should not have to be. Eliana's gaze softened. Perhaps, but when people's hearts change because of these moments, maybe they're worth enduring. Behind them, Melanie moved tentatively. Her steps were slow, as though she walked through a thick fog of emotion. She stopped at a respectful distance from Eliana. She held her tablet pressed to her chest, her fingers trembling from the effort of holding herself together. Dr. Grant, she whispered. Eliana looked up, her expression calm and open. Melanie took a breath that nearly broke in the middle. I want to say something else, if you'll let me. Martha shifted, ready to intervene if needed, but Eliana placed a gentle hand on her forearm. I am listening, Eliana said. Melanie swallowed hard. I did not realize how deep my biases ran. I always thought I treated passengers fairly, that I was strict only because I wanted order. But today, her voice cracked. Today I saw myself through someone else's eyes, and I did not like what I saw. A faint tremor traveled down her arm. I am so sorry, she whispered. Eliana nodded softly. Thank you for saying it. Melanie blinked, surprised at the ease with which the words were received. You are not angry. I was hurt, Eliana admitted. But anger keeps you stuck. Understanding moves you forward. Melanie pressed her lips together, and something shifted in her face. A subtle release. A breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Carter quietly observed, moved by the quiet gravitas of the exchange. Langford, hearing their words, closed his eyes. His breathing grew uneven. He slowly stood from his seat and approached, though he remained several steps away. His posture no longer held arrogance, only humility. Dr. Grant, Langford said softly. Eliana turned, her expression patient. He hesitated, searching for words unfamiliar to him. I behaved in a way I am ashamed of. I spoke from ignorance, from entitlement? He shook his head slightly. You deserved respect. I did not give it. Eliana studied him with quiet attention. Langford's voice wavered. I am sorry. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then Eliana nodded gently. Acknowledging it is the first step. Langford's eyes glistened, though he quickly blinked away the emotion. The passengers watching did not applaud, did not cheer. Instead, the cabin filled with a softer kind of respect, a recognition that this moment mattered because change was happening quietly. Honestly, Captain Cole stepped forward again. We will begin preparations for departure shortly. Before that, we need to finalize seat reassignments. Langford nodded, accepting the consequence. Melanie stepped back, relieved but fragile. Carter took his new role with dignity and care. Martha squeezed Eliana's hand affectionately. And Eliana, sitting in the center of it all, felt the emotional contours of the moment settle around her. Not light, not heavy. Something balanced. Something real. The plane hummed softly, a sign that things were slowly moving forward. Carter approached gently. Dr. Grant, if you need anything throughout this flight, I will be here. Eliana smiled. Thank you. Passengers across the cabin exchanged glances of subtle admiration. Some nodded to her with quiet respect. Others looked thoughtful, as though reevaluating their own assumptions. Captain Cole addressed the cabin once more. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will proceed shortly. He returned to the cockpit, leaving a lingering sense of order restored. The VIP cabin settled. But beneath the calm, something deeper had begun to shift. Eliana rested back into her seat, her breath slow and steady. She felt tired, but also strangely hopeful. Not because justice had been served in a dramatic way, but because honesty had taken root in a place where it was least expected. And sometimes, she thought, that was where truth did the most good. The aircraft eased into a hush that felt almost fragile. Not the calm of routine flight preparation, but something more delicate, shaped by the weight of human hearts slowly resetting themselves. Conversations faded into soft murmurs, while overhead lights dimmed slightly as the crew adjusted the cabin for takeoff. Eliana watched the subtle shift around her. The atmosphere had changed. The tension that once wrapped tightly around every seat now loosened into a quieter contemplation. People were thinking, reflecting, learning in silence. And that, she thought, was how change often began. Not with applause, not with grand gestures, but with steady breaths after hard truths. Martha took a slow sip of water, her hands finally relaxing. I cannot believe we are finally past the worst of it, she whispered. Eliana smiled gently. We are past the first part, but beginnings often create their own ripples. Martha looked thoughtful. Do you think the captain will face backlash for being honest? Eliana gazed ahead. Integrity always carries a price, but peace of mind is worth more. Before Martha could respond, Carter stepped close to them with a respectful nod. The new responsibility assigned to him seemed to ground his posture. His movements were more deliberate, more mindful, as though the weight of the moment had matured his confidence. Dr. Grant, he said softly, we are preparing for takeoff. If you need anything before we close the cabin, please tell me. Just a smooth flight, Eliana replied, warmth in her tone. Carter smiled. I will do my best. As he moved on, Melanie watched from the edge of the galley. Her eyes were puffy from crying, and though she tried to stand properly, her shoulders curled in with lingering shame. The badge on her uniform felt heavier than usual. The embroidered letters no longer symbols of pride, but reminders of a moment she wished she could undo. She caught Eliana's gaze for a brief moment. Something in her expression trembled, gratitude, regret, an unspoken plea for time to prove herself different from her worst moment. Eliana nodded gently, offering a small grace that made Melanie's breath catch. Across the aisle, Langford sat with his fingers interlocked, staring into the space ahead of him. His posture had changed drastically from the man who entered the plane earlier. A quiet humility settled over him like a shadow touched with warmth. Not darkness, more like the soft dimming of someone reevaluating their path. His pride had cracked open, and through that crack something human glimmered. He lifted his head just enough to catch Eliana observing him. She did not look away. She did not glare. She simply held his gaze with a calm acceptance that disarmed him. Langford's lips parted slightly before he looked down again, overwhelmed by the depth of compassion he didn't expect from the person he wronged. The rest of the passengers settled into stillness. Even those who hadn't spoken earlier now watched Eliana with a quiet mix of respect and reflection. People who had flown hundreds of times and sat through countless inconveniences found themselves touched by something they rarely saw so clearly: dignity that required neither title nor defense. The cabin lights softened further, signaling final boarding checks. Captain Cole emerged once more, but this time his steps carried a firm efficiency. He addressed Carter briefly, then glanced toward Eliana. In that single look, she saw gratitude, respect, and perhaps something deeper, a recognition of shared leadership, even across different worlds. He turned to make one last announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during the delay. We will begin our takeoff sequence shortly. Passengers nodded subtly. Some sighed in relief. But Captain Cole wasn't finished. I also want to thank Dr. Grant for her calm and respectful conduct during the earlier incident. Her grace helped guide this resolution. The acknowledgement settled into the air with a quiet resonance. Eliana felt warmth rise in her chest. Though she remained humble, she never needed praise. But hearing truth acknowledged openly felt like a salve to old wounds she no longer spoke about. Captain Cole bowed his head lightly, then returned to the cockpit. The engines hummed lower as the plane prepared for pushback. As the silence stretched, something unexpected happened. Melanie stepped forward, not to speak loudly or draw attention. She moved slowly toward Eliana with a fragile courage, stopping at a comfortable distance. Her voice was almost a whisper. Dr. Grant, if you do not mind, may I ask you something? Eliana nodded. Of course. Melanie pressed her palm against her chest. Her voice trembled. How do you stay so composed? I acted unfairly. I was unprofessional. You had every right to expose me, Kay, but you showed more compassion than I deserved. Eliana studied her gently. Most people hurt others not because they are cruel, but because they are unaware of the damage they cause. Melanie blinked, tears threatening again. Eliana continued softly. The goal is not to punish. The goal is to help people see what they could not see before. Melanie's breath shivered. And you think I can learn from this? I think anyone can. Eliana replied. A tear rolled down Melanie's cheek, but she didn't hide it. She nodded once, deeply, as though committing herself to a different future. She returned to her post, steadier than before. Langford watched the exchange with quiet awe. Something inside him shifted. It wasn't guilt alone, it was aspiration. He wanted to be better than the man he had shown the world today. But just as he gathered the courage to speak again, a sudden vibration rumbled through the floor beneath them. The plane jolted. Passengers gasped softly. Carter's head snapped up. That was not supposed to happen. Eliana straightened slowly, her brows drawing together. Is everything all right? Martha gripped the armrest. What was that? Before anyone could speculate further, the intercom chimed with an unexpected urgency. Carter, report to the cockpit immediately. The voice wasn't Captain Cole's. It was the co-pilot, and tension laced his tone. Carter hurried forward, minutes stretched in tight anticipation. The engines pulsed again, not unstable, but unusual. like a machine hesitating. A mechanical unease seeped through the cabin. Melanie stepped back into the aisle. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are evaluating a minor technical matter. Her voice was steadier than earlier, but the worry behind it did not go unnoticed. Langford swallowed hard. This cannot be happening. Not now. Eliana closed her eyes briefly, grounding herself. She felt neither fear nor panic, but a rising awareness that the story unfolding around them was not finished. Finally, after what felt like a long wait, Captain Cole stepped out again, his expression serious. He addressed the cabin in a composed yet weighty tone. We have encountered an unexpected technical issue. We will remain on the ground until it is fully resolved. Safety is the priority. The passengers murmured anxiously, but Captain Cole's next words carried a different kind of heaviness. And there is something else. A ripple passed through the cabin. Eliana tilted her head slightly, sensing a new shift. Captain Cole continued. Our internal logs have triggered an alert requiring immediate verification. It concerns a passenger on board. His eyes moved across the cabin, then stopped. On Eliana, a quiet shock tightened the air. What kind of alert? She asked, calm but focused. Captain Cole held her gaze, one that requires your personal confirmation. Everyone turned toward her, and for the first time since she boarded the flight, Eliana felt a stillness settle inside her that wasn't peace. It was recognition. Something deeper was unfolding, something she had not expected. For a few seconds, no one moved. The quiet inside the cabin thickened, pulling every breath into a slow, suspended pause. Even the overhead lights seemed to dim, as if the aircraft itself sensed something delicate unfolding. Eliana held Captain Cole's gaze calmly, though she felt the faint tightening of old memories stirring deep inside her. Memories she never invited but had learned to live alongside. She set her hands gently on her lap and waited for him to continue. Captain, she said softly, tell me what you need. He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to keep the conversation private while still speaking with clarity. Our system flagged a mismatch associated with your travel profile. It is probably a routine cross-check, but protocol requires clarification. The passengers exchanged nervous glances. Langford's brow furrowed as if trying to understand why a woman like Eliana would ever be tied to a system alert. Martha leaned protectively toward her, almost instinctively. Eliana inhaled slowly. There was no fear in her eyes, only a gentle acceptance, like someone who had experienced enough storms to no longer flinch when clouds gathered. Where would you like me to verify the information? She asked. The cockpit, Captain Cole replied. Eliana nodded. Then let us take care of it. As she rose, a soft rustling spread through the cabin. People watched her, not with suspicion, but with genuine concern. The woman who had shown grace beyond expectations now seemed touched by something unseen. Before stepping forward, Eliana placed a calming hand on Martha's arm. It is all right, she whispered. These things happen more often than you know. Martha squeezed her fingers gently. Be careful, and hurry back. Eliana offered a faint smile before moving toward the cockpit. Carter opened the door for her, his expression serious but respectful. Inside, the small space felt warmer, lit by a soft amber glow from the instrument panel. The hum of dormant engines filled the background like a low, steady heartbeat. The co-pilot, Adam Price, greeted her with calm professionalism. He held a tablet in his hands, the screen glowing with an alert notification. Thank you for coming, he said. We just need to confirm one detail tied to your government verification number. Eliana studied the screen. A single line blinked at the top, noting a historical flag resolved years prior. Something from her early career before the world recognized her leadership. It was sealed. She murmured. Adam nodded. It was. But our updated system occasionally rechecks sealed records when something triggers a secondary identity scan. And what was the trigger? She asked. Captain Cole exchanged a heavy glance with Adam before answering. Your name appeared in an independent security database. Someone on this aircraft submitted a complaint during boarding. Eliana felt her pulse tighten for the first time since she stepped onto the plane. Not painfully, just a reminder that even calm hearts react when something sharp touches the past. Who filed it? She asked gently. Captain Cole hesitated. We cannot disclose that without cause. But she already knew. She closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a breath that held both weariness and understanding. Thomas Langford, she said quietly. Captain Cole froze. Adam exchanged a troubled glance with him. You knew, Adam whispered. I recognize the pattern. Eliana replied. People like him often submit preemptive reports when they feel threatened by someone they underestimate. Captain Cole leaned against the panel, troubled. I am sorry you had to face this. You did not do it, she said with calm certainty. And systems only reflect what people feed into them. She reviewed the document again. With one tap, she verified the required confirmation. The alert vanished instantly. Adam sighed with relief. Everything is clear now. No further action needed, Captain Cole added. We will document this as an error in the automated cross-check. Eliana touched the edge of the console, grounding herself before turning toward the door. Before she left, Captain Cole spoke again. Doc Grant, are you all right? She took a moment before answering. I am used to shadows resurfacing, but I prefer them not to follow me onto flights. Her tone held no bitterness, only truth. Captain Cole nodded slowly, recognizing the strength it took to say those words without anger. Carter guided her back to the cabin. When she stepped out, every eye lifted toward her in silent expectation. The passengers wanted reassurance. They wanted clarity. But more than anything, they wanted to know she was safe. Eliana moved with the same poise she had carried since the beginning. She returned to her seat, smoothing her blazer carefully before sitting. Martha leaned close, anxiety pressing through her whisper. What happened? Just a verification. Eliana replied, It is settled. Langford, sitting several rows ahead, turned slightly to glance back at her. His expression flickered with surprise, confusion, and something that looked like guilt. He realized the alert had not shaken her. It had only revealed the quiet resilience he never expected from the woman he misjudged. The aircraft remained still on the tarmac. The engines hummed in waiting. Then Melanie approached, her hands clasped tightly together. Dr. Grant, we are ready for cabin secure checks. But Captain Cole asked if you would allow him to make an announcement first. Eliana nodded. Of course. Melanie walked toward the front, still carrying the weight of accountability in her posture. The intercom chimed softly. Captain Cole's voice filled the cabin, warm yet firm. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Earlier, a procedural verification required our immediate attention. It has been fully resolved. There is no issue with any passenger's documentation. Several passengers exhaled at once. Captain Cole continued. I also wish to clarify one more point. False reports submitted about fellow passengers create unnecessary delays and stress. Our role is to ensure safety, not reinforce personal biases. Let us move forward with respect. Every word landed quietly but powerfully. Langford shut his eyes, the message striking him with unexpected force. Melanie then proceeded down the aisle, checking seat belts and overhead bins. Her movement steadied as she approached Eliana. When she paused beside her, Eliana looked up gently. Melanie swallowed hard. I just want you to know, after today, I do not want to be the person I was this morning. Eliana's voice remained soft. Then begin by being honest with yourself. Melanie nodded, tears quietly slipping down her face. Eliana added, Growth starts in the moments when we feel exposed. That is when we have the chance to change. Melanie covered her mouth briefly, trying to maintain composure before returning to her duties. As the cabin settled, Langford hesitated before standing from his seat. The passengers glanced up, curious. He approached Eliana slowly, each step measured and heavy with hesitation. When he reached her row, he stopped, breath unsteady. Dr. Grant, he began quietly. I need to say something. Eliana lifted her eyes, calm and steady. Langford continued, voice thick with remorse. I was the one who filed that report. I thought I was following a precaution, but I see now that I was protecting my pride, not anyone's safety. Silence enveloped the moment. I cannot undo what I did, he whispered, but I'm asking for a chance to understand what led me there. Eliana studied him, her expression neither angry nor forgiving yet. Simply present. You cannot learn, she said softly, until you stop running from the truth. Langford nodded slowly. Then I would like to stop running. His voice broke slightly. Eliana held his gaze. Growth is slow, but sincerity is the first step. He bowed his head, then returned quietly to his seat. The weight in the cabin shifted again. Not lighter, just clearer. Captain Cole's voice returned over the intercom. Prepare for takeoff. As the engines deepened into their steady roar, Eliana rested her hand over her heart, grounding herself once more. She had faced turbulence far worse than any aircraft could create, and she remained whole. Outside the window, the sun lowered toward the horizon, painting the runway in warm gold. A new chapter of the flight was beginning, a new chapter for everyone. The aircraft began rolling toward the runway with a slow, deliberate motion. A gentle hum filled the cabin as the engines prepared to lift hundreds of thousands of pounds into the air. Yet the sound felt strangely calming now, like a long breath drawn after a difficult confession. Eliana settled into her seat and allowed her shoulders to soften. Martha sat beside her with a quiet presence, no words needed. The mood in the cabin had shifted again, but not with tension. It felt like the air carried a tender awareness, as though everyone was relearning the meaning of dignity. The runway light stretched ahead, glowing like a soft river guiding them forward. A faint pink brushed across the evening sky, giving the horizon a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the turmoil earlier. When the engines surged, the bodies in the cabin pressed gently into their seats. The aircraft gathered speed, each second carrying them farther from the ground and deeper into the shared silence of ascent. Martha grasped the armrest with one hand, the other resting lightly over her heart. I have flown more times than I can count, she whispered, but tonight feels strange. Eliana turned to her. Strange can be the beginning of something meaningful. Martha breathed out slowly. You always find the hopeful angle. I try, Eliana said. Hope has carried me farther than fear ever did. As the jet lifted smoothly into the sky, the cabin lights dimmed, and the faint glow of sunset spilled through the windows. The city below shrank into a tapestry of lights, each one a tiny reminder of someone's life happening far away from this suspended sanctuary. Once they reached cruising altitude, the captain's voice came through, steady and reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached a smooth flight path. You are now free to relax. His tone held something warmer than professionalism. It held admiration. Carter stepped out moments later and began moving gently through the aisle, checking passengers with a renewed sense of purpose. His eyes no longer held the hesitation of earlier hours. The weight of what he had witnessed had awakened something stronger in him. Responsibility, compassion, leadership forming in real time. When he approached Eliana, his voice softened. If you need anything during the flight, Dr. Grant, even just a moment of quiet, I am here. Eliana smiled slightly. Thank you. Carter, you have handled today with grace. He lowered his head, humbled. I learned a lot more than safety protocols this afternoon. After he walked away, the cabin settled into a softer quiet, one filled with reflective thoughts. A few passengers exchanged subtle nods with Eliana, silent acknowledgments of respect. Others looked toward Langford, who sat very still, lost in the difficult work of internal reckoning. A little later, Melanie approached slowly, holding 2 cups of warm tea. Her hands trembled slightly, but her expression carried sincerity. I brought these, if you are comfortable accepting them. Eliana nodded. Of course. Melanie handed her the cup, then looked down as if gathering her courage. When I saw the way you walked back into the cabin, not angry, not even defensive, I realized how far I still have to go. I do not know how you carry so much without letting it harden you. The question was soft, almost childlike. Eliana let the steam from the tea warm her face before she answered. Years ago, someone told me that dignity is not what the world gives you. It is what you decide you will not let the world take. Melanie's breath caught. I have never heard it said that way. It saved me many times, Eliana whispered. Melanie swallowed hard. Thank you. Truly? She stepped back, bowing her head before returning to her post with a heart trying earnestly to change. For a brief stretch of time, the flight settled into a peaceful rhythm. People breathed deeper, conversations softened. The aircraft became less a vehicle and more a moving sanctuary for fragile transformations. But peace never lasts long when old wounds still linger beneath the surface. A small alert tone chimed over the speaker near the galley. Not loud, just sharp enough to draw attention. Melanie looked toward it, puzzled. That is odd. Carter approached quickly. What is it? The system wants a secondary confirmation from the cockpit, Melanie said quietly. But there is no reason for it to activate now. Across the aisle. Langford stiffened, as though startled by the sudden shift. Carter leaned toward her. Was the message clear? Clear enough, Melanie replied. Before they could say more, the intercom clicked again. Captain Cole's voice returned. Lower than before. Dr. Grant, when you are ready, I need a moment with you at the front. Martha frowned deeply. Already. What now? Eliana rested her hand on Martha's again. Do not worry. It may be nothing. But even she felt a subtle pull inside her chest. A quiet intuition. A sense that the universe was unfolding something she had long tried to keep at rest. She rose with calm authority, walked toward the front, and paused just before the cockpit door. Carter opened it gently. Inside, Captain and co-pilot stood with unusually serious expressions. Not fearful, not tense, just somber. Captain Cole gestured toward the small tablet on the console. Dr. Grant, we received a follow-up notification from the same database. It is not an error, it is a request. A request for what? She asked. Adam took a slow breath. It asks for contact with you. Specifically you. Eliana felt a faint chill move through her spine. She stepped closer to read the message, her breath slowing as the words appeared clearly. Request for confirmation. High priority. Center Department of Civil Aviation Oversight. Reason open classification discrepancy tied to the Grant Initiative. Her pulse paused for one beat, then another. The Grant Initiative? A part of her past she rarely allowed herself to revisit. A project that shaped her early years. A program meant to uplift underrepresented voice groups in aerospace. A program derailed by politics, controversy, and betrayal from someone she once trusted. She exhaled slowly. So it has resurfaced, she said quietly. Captain Cole studied her. Does this put you at any risk? No, she answered. But it may require a conversation I have avoided for a long time. Adam hesitated. We can relay a message that you will respond after landing. Eliana shook her head gently. No. If they reached me in the sky, then the matter is urgent. Forward the request. Captain Cole nodded solemnly. She stepped back into the cabin, but instead of returning immediately to her seat, she paused near the curtain separating first class. The view of passengers in soft lamplight felt deeply human, imperfect, honest, trying. Martha stood part way, searching her face. Eliana, is it serious? Eliana approached her slowly. It is history, and history often calls when one least expects it. Martha's voice cracked. What can I do? Be here, Eliana whispered. That is enough. She sat again, lifting her chin as the aircraft drifted through a quiet stretch of clouds. Langford glanced back, but seeing the depth in her eyes, he looked away, overwhelmed by the quiet strength he could not yet comprehend. Melanie stepped closer, hesitant. If you need anything, any help. Thank you, Eliana said softly. Your kindness means more than you know. The cabin settled again. But something new rippled beneath the silence. Not danger, not fear, expectation. As if the sky itself was preparing them for truths that had waited too long. Eliana looked out the window for a long moment. The clouds drifted like slow-moving tides. Above them, the last light of day spread across the horizon like a quiet promise. She placed her hand over her heart and breathed deeply. Whatever awaited her on the ground, she would meet it with the same grace she carried through the air. The soft hum of the engines wrapped the cabin in a gentle rhythm. It was the kind of steady sound that usually lulled passengers into quiet comfort. Yet tonight it seemed to underline something deeper. Every vibration felt like a reminder that movement was happening both outside and within. The aircraft glided forward, but so did the truths that had finally begun to surface. Eliana sat still, eyes drifting toward the faint reflection of her face on the window. The clouds outside formed layers of silver and white, drifting like memories she had kept neatly folded for years. She could hear her own heartbeat echoing faintly in her ears, not from fear, but from anticipation. The Grant Initiative, a name she had not spoken aloud in years. A name tied to her beginning and to her most painful professional loss. Martha studied her in silence before leaning slightly closer. You look like you are somewhere far from this plane. Eliana smiled at the reflection in the glass. In some ways, I am. Do you want to talk about it? Martha asked softly. The time will come. Eliana replied. Right now, I am still understanding how the past found its way onto this flight. Martha rested a warm hand on her arm. Whatever it is, you are not alone. Eliana turned gently toward her. I know. And that makes this easier than it would have been years ago. Before Martha could speak again, Carter approached with cautious steps. He kept his voice low. Dr. Grant. The cockpit received a follow-up message from the agency. They want to initiate a live contact. The captain said you can take it privately in the forward service area if you wish. For a moment, Eliana considered refusing, but she had learned long ago that avoiding truth only allowed it to grow heavier. Tell the captain I will speak with them, she said. Carter nodded and moved forward, leaving a quiet stillness behind him. When Eliana rose, the passengers watched her with a subtle reverence, as though they sensed the weight she carried without knowing its shape. Melanie stepped gently out of her path, her eyes filled with concern and a blooming admiration. Eliana slipped behind the front curtain, where the narrow service area stood softly lit. Captain Cole waited there, holding a small communicator linked to the secure line the agency had activated. He offered her the device with a respectful nod. Take all the time you need. She took the communicator, her fingers brushed its cool surface, grounding herself before she pressed the activation button. A calm voice greeted her. Dr. Grant? This is Director Latham from the Oversight Division. Thank you for connecting mid-flight. Director, she replied, it must be urgent if it could not wait for landing. It is, he said. We are reopening inquiries related to the Grant Initiative. We need your cooperation to assist in determining what happened to the suppressed data during the final months of the program. A subtle tension traveled through her spine. Suppressed data? She repeated quietly. Yes, Director Latham said. Our analysts discovered discrepancies. Large portions of your original findings appear altered or missing from the National Archive. It seems someone tampered with them shortly before the project was terminated. Eliana felt her breath still for one moment before she regained control. Why contact me now? Because the alteration was traced back to someone who recently attempted to access your sealed documents again, the director replied. We believe this individual may be trying to reopen what they buried years ago. The pieces fell quietly into place. Someone on this flight submitted a false report about me, she said softly. And that triggered your system. Yes, he confirmed. The complaint was cross-referenced with archived identifiers, some of which had been tampered with. That is how the alert surfaced. Eliana closed her eyes briefly. She understood now. The flight had not just been a coincidence of prejudice. It was a collision between her past and her present. Director, she said, her voice steady, I will cooperate fully, but I will need access to every page of the original files, not the redacted versions. You will have them, he replied. After you land, expect a formal briefing. She ended the call and stood still for a long moment, letting the meaning of it all settle in her chest. Not pain, not fear. Just the quiet realization that the truth she once lost was beginning to unfold again. When she stepped back into the cabin, the shift in her presence was subtle yet unmistakable. A deeper calm, a stronger resolve, as though she had walked through a doorway no one else could see. Martha leaned forward anxiously. What happened? Eliana gave her a gentle smile. The past is finally asking for answers, and I am ready to give them. Before Martha could respond, Langford rose from his seat. His expression was conflicted, as though battling something inside himself. He stepped toward Eliana with hesitant movements. I overheard part of what the captain said earlier. Not the details. Just that someone filed something wrong about you. Eliana looked at him calmly. Yes? He swallowed. I know I set that in motion. I did not know it would harm you beyond embarrassment. I am not asking for forgiveness. I just want to understand how to repair even a fraction of the damage. Eliana studied him gently. There was sincerity in his voice. A sincerity touched by shame and a deeper longing to be better than the man he had shown himself to be. You cannot repair what someone else destroyed years ago, she said softly. But you can begin by understanding why you felt threatened in the first place. Langford lowered his gaze. Because you carried a quiet strength that made me feel small. Eliana's expression softened. Strength is not meant to diminish others. But fear often twists what we see. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening with painful clarity. I would like to learn. If you would allow me? She considered him for a moment, then spoke with gentle firmness. The first lesson is honesty. The second is humility. The rest will come with practice. Langford bowed his head, breathing deeply as though her words had opened a door inside him. Martha leaned closer to Eliana after he returned to his seat. You have a way of lifting people without excusing them? I try to see the part of them that wants to change. Eliana replied. The lights softened as the cabin crew prepared for evening service. The sky outside had darkened into deep blue, streaked with lingering strands of fading gold. Melanie approached once more with a cautious smile. Dinner service will begin shortly. I wanted to check if you needed anything before we start. Eliana shook her head gently. No, thank you. You are doing well. That simple acknowledgement brought tears to Melanie's eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. She returned to the galley with renewed purpose. For a while, the flight moved with an almost meditative quiet. People ate slowly. Some watched the changing sky. Others closed their eyes, lulled by the hum of altitude. Then Captain Cole stepped into the cabin and approached Eliana with a solemn expression. We received an update from the ground team. The director sent a message for you. Eliana looked up at him. What did he say? He said the person who tampered with your work years ago, the person who erased your findings, has been identified. The murmurs around them faded as passengers tuned their attention toward the captain's words. Eliana sat upright, her breath steady. Who was it? Captain Cole held her gaze. His voice dropped to a low register, heavy with the weight of revelation. It was someone from your own research team. Her eyes softened, though the stillness in them deepened like the center of a quiet storm. Then, she whispered, the truth will be heavier than I thought. The aircraft drifted through a slow patch of clouds, and for a moment, the world outside faded into quiet white. Inside? However, everything was beginning to sharpen. The past was no longer behind her. It was walking toward her with deliberate steps. The cabin lights dimmed further as the aircraft cruised through a quiet stretch of night sky. Darkness pressed gently against the windows, broken only by faint silver ribbons reflecting the moon. Passengers settled deeper into their seats, unaware that the most delicate turning point of the journey was only beginning. Eliana clasped her hands softly, letting her breath slow to a steady rhythm. Her pulse remained calm, but inside a tide of old questions stirred. Someone from her research team, someone she once trusted, someone who had destroyed years of work meant to lift voices like hers? Martha studied her with worried eyes. You are holding something heavy again. I can see it in the way your shoulders fall. Eliana offered a quiet smile. I am remembering the faces of the young scientists I led. Their drive, their belief that we could build something bigger than ourselves. And one of them betrayed that belief. Martha whispered. Eliana looked out the window. Sometimes betrayal is not born from cruelty. Sometimes it is born from fear. I just do not know which fear I am about to face. Before Martha could speak again, Carter approached with careful steps, as though sensing the fragile air around them. Dr. Grant, Captain Cole would like a word. He thought you should hear the rest in a quiet space. Eliana nodded gently. Thank you. Carter? She rose and followed him toward the front of the cabin. The aisle seemed longer now, lined with passengers who seemed to hold their breath the way one does in a church right before a confession. Langford lifted his eyes briefly, guilt and curiosity warring inside him. Melanie paused her tasks, watching with an expression shaped by awe and worry. Eliana stepped behind the forward curtain. Captain Cole waited, leaning slightly against the wall near the emergency equipment panel. His face held a softness beneath the concern. Dr. Grant, he said, his voice low. There is more. Eliana steadied herself. Tell me. The director sent another encrypted message. He continued. The person who altered your work, he was identified through an old access log. Her breath paused subtly. Captain Cole nodded. Eliana let the words sit inside her for several seconds. The memories shifted through her mind like a sequence of slow-moving lights. Then one face emerged from the shadows. A man with patient eyes, always standing a little behind the group, always writing notes in the margins no one else saw. A man she once mentored. She whispered the name before she could stop herself. Evan Rhodes. Captain Cole's expression froze, confirming her intuition. You know him, he said quietly. Eliana nodded slowly. He was one of my brightest analysts. Brilliant, reserved, and overly cautious with his ambitions. He struggled with the political pressure that surrounded the Grant initiative. He kept telling me we were moving too fast, that the Aerospace Board was not ready for the kind of reform we proposed. Captain Cole crossed his arms gently. The director believes Evan altered your files because he feared the project would draw negative attention to him. He was never malicious, she said softly. Just afraid of losing his place in a world that barely let him stand there in the first place. Fear makes people do things they never imagined themselves capable of, Captain Cole murmured. Eliana lowered her gaze. But fear does not erase accountability. No, he replied. It does not. For a moment, they stood in silence as the aircraft continued cutting through the dark. The engines hummed like distant thunder wrapped in velvet. Then the captain added, There is one more detail. Eliana lifted her eyes again. Evan did not access the files recently. Captain Cole said slowly, Someone else tried to open the tampered archive using his old credentials. The meaning struck her in waves. So the person trying to dig up the past is not him? She whispered. No, the captain replied, but someone connected to him, someone who knew enough to look in the right place. Eliana exhaled quietly, feeling the pieces shifting but not yet fitting together. She stepped back into the cabin, her thoughts moving with a deeper intensity. The murmuring of passengers faded into soft background noise as she walked down the aisle. Martha watched her return, concern etched into every line of her face. What did you learn? Martha asked as soon as she sat down. Eliana clasped her hands. It was Evan. Years ago. He altered the data, but someone else is searching for the truth now. Martha frowned. Someone who wants to reveal what he hid, or someone who wants to bury it again? Eliana replied. The lights flickered gently as the cabin crew moved about. Melanie delivered warm drinks with a calmer posture than earlier, her steps grounded by humility she seemed to be rediscovering. Carter adjusted a storage latch, then glanced toward Eliana as though silently offering support. Langford shifted in his seat, restless. After several moments, he stood and approached Eliana with visible hesitation. May I speak with you? He asked softly. Martha's protective instinct rose instantly, but Eliana motioned for calm. Yes, she said. What is on your mind? Langford took a steady breath. I know it is not my place to pry, but when I heard a name earlier, Rhodes, it sounded familiar. Not from my business world. Somewhere else. Somewhere unexpected. Eliana observed him carefully. Tell me what you remember. Langford rubbed the back of his neck. Years ago, I served on a temporary advisory committee for a government contracting board. We reviewed initiative proposals. One application came across my desk. It was flagged. Something about internal inconsistencies and unexplained file removals. A subtle chill moved through Eliana's body. Langford continued. The one who submitted the flagged report, the person who questioned the integrity of the Grant initiative, was Evan Rhodes. Her breath deepened to steady herself. And there was a second name on the document. Langford added, a name I did not understand until now. Yours. Eliana looked down at her hands. Evan told me the board rejected us because our timeline was unrealistic. Langford shook his head. He submitted the complaint himself. You never even stood a chance. The truth struck gently but firmly, like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place after years of being forced into the wrong corner. Eliana leaned back, releasing a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside her since the day the initiative fell apart. Martha took her hand tightly. Why did he do it? Martha whispered. Eliana spoke slowly, softly. He was brilliant, but he did not believe the world would make room for someone like him. He wanted safety more than justice. And in choosing safety, he chose the easier betrayal. Langford's voice lowered. You deserved better. Eliana met his eyes gently. We all deserve better. But we only receive it when people learn to see beyond their fear. Langford nodded slowly, visibly moved. I hope someday I can stand even half as tall as you do. You are already trying, Eliana replied. That is more than many ever attempt. He returned to his seat with a humbled heart. The cabin quieted again. The flight attendants finished their service and dimmed the lights fully. A soft blue glow spread across the ceiling, resembling the calm wash of moonlight across a sleeping lake. Eliana closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the engines soothe the tension inside her. But just as she began to settle, the intercom chimed again. Captain Cole's voice entered the cabin, quieter than before. Dr. Grant. The director has sent one final piece of information. Eliana opened her eyes slowly. He said, Captain Cole continued, that the person who attempted to access your files earlier today boarded this very flight. The entire cabin fell into a profound silence. Martha's grip tightened around Eliana's hand. Melanie stood frozen halfway down the aisle. Langford stared ahead, breath caught. The aircraft continued its smooth path through the night, but something inside the cabin shifted sharply. The past was not just approaching, it was already here. For several long seconds, the cabin remained frozen. It was not the stillness of fear, nor the kind that follows danger. It was the silence that comes when people realize they have stepped into a story, unfolding larger than themselves. A shared breath held for a single truth that was now making its way toward the light. Eliana felt the quiet settle around her like soft cloth. She did not startle. She did not stiffen. She had spent a lifetime walking through shadows others tried to place in her path. This moment, though unexpected, felt strangely familiar, a gentle echo of the years she carried. Martha whispered, barely audible. Someone on this flight tried to tamper with your past. Eliana nodded slowly. Yes, do you know who it is? Martha asked. I have an idea, Eliana replied, though her voice held neither accusation nor fear, only recognition. The curtains rustled softly as Carter approached with deliberate, steady steps. His expression was composed, yet touched with concern. Dr. Grant, Captain Cole would like you at the front when you are ready. He believes we should confirm the final detail before landing. Eliana looked at Martha, whose eyes pleaded for reassurance. I will be back, Eliana said softly. The truth does not frighten me. Martha nodded tightly and released her hand. As Eliana rose, the cabin watched with a tense, hushed anticipation. Not because they distrusted her, but because something about her presence had become an anchor during the flight. A calm center they now felt protective of. Melanie paused mid-aisle, clutching the back of a seat for balance. Her eyes followed Eliana with a mixture of fear and quiet loyalty, as if silently promising she would stand by whatever unfolded next. Langford swallowed hard. His guilt had reshaped itself into something heavier, more complex. He understood now that his earlier complaint had triggered a chain of events far deeper than his own insecurity. Watching Eliana walk toward the front, he felt a sharp ache of remorse. Eliana stepped behind the curtain. The dim light in the service area cast a soft glow across her features. Captain Cole stood waiting, the communicator in hand, his posture firm but gentle. He met her gaze. Dr. Grant. The director has confirmed the name. Eliana inhaled deeply, steadying herself. Tell me. Captain Cole lowered his voice. The person who tried to access the tampered files this morning is Evan Rhodes. The name struck like a quiet flame. Not explosive, just deeply illuminating. Eliana closed her eyes, absorbing the truth. It seems, Captain Cole continued, he booked passage on this flight less than 24 hours ago. He was originally assigned to a seat in the forward cabin. Eliana's voice was soft. Was he replaced when they moved the passengers earlier? Yes, the captain answered. During the chaos with seating assignments, his seat was given to someone else. He was moved farther back. Eliana breathed slowly. So he has been here all along. Captain Cole nodded. Eliana remained still for a moment before speaking again. Did the director say why he tried to access the files? He did, Captain Cole replied. It appears Evan discovered that someone else plans to publish a report blaming you for the failure of the Grant initiative. He may be trying to stop it. The ground shifted quietly beneath her heart. Eliana whispered. After all these years, he came back to face what he did. Or to face you, the captain said gently. Eliana lifted her gaze. Then I will speak with him. Captain Cole hesitated. Are you certain? Yes, she said simply. Avoiding truth is what broke the initiative. Confronting it is the only way forward. He stepped aside, giving her space to return to the cabin. Eliana walked slowly down the aisle. Each step carried a deeper gravity, a recognition that she was walking toward an ending she once believed would never come. Passengers watched with quiet understanding, sensing the importance of what she was about to do. When she reached the midpoint of the cabin, she stopped. There, in a window seat 2 rows behind Langford, a man sat motionless, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles blanched. His posture was rigid, shoulders pulled inward. He looked older than she remembered. Lines marked his face, shaped by years of silence and unspoken regret. Evan Rhodes. He lifted his eyes slowly. The moment their gazes met, the cabin dissolved into silence. The lights dimmed to a soft glow, the air thick with meaning. Evan's breath shuddered. Eliana, his voice cracked. I did not expect you to find out like this. Eliana stepped closer. You came looking for the truth. He nodded, shame filling his eyes. I thought I could fix what I broke. But when I saw you on the passenger list, I panicked. I did not know how to face you. You could have spoken to me, Eliana said quietly. I did not believe I deserved that chance. Evan whispered. Eliana held his gaze, searching for the man he once was beneath the man he became. Why did you alter the files? She asked, her voice a soft invitation rather than an accusation. Evan's shoulders slumped, as though releasing years of hidden weight. I was afraid. I thought the initiative would expose me. I thought I would lose my job, my reputation, everything I worked for. And in protecting yourself, Eliana said gently, you sacrificed the work of an entire team. Tears pooled in Evan's eyes. I know. I have lived with that guilt every day since. Eliana let the silence breathe between them. It was not the silence of condemnation. It was the silence needed for truth to fully settle. Evan continued, voice trembling. A reporter is preparing a story. Someone leaked the altered files and blamed the discrepancies on you. They want to paint you as irresponsible, reckless. They want to erase the initiative entirely. And you are trying to stop them. Eliana murmured. Yes, Evans said. But I know I have no right to ask for your help. I only want the truth restored before it is too late. Eliana studied him. She saw the fear that once guided him, but she also saw something new, a courage born from remorse, a desire to repair, even if it cost him everything he once protected. You cannot change the past, she said softly, but you can choose what you do with the truth now. Evan wiped his eyes. Will you allow me to make it right? Eliana did not answer immediately. She weighed her words carefully, knowing this moment would shape not just him, but herself. Finally, she spoke. I will work with anyone who chooses truth over fear, even if that person is the one who once broke it. Evan bowed his head, overwhelmed. Thank you. I do not deserve your grace. Grace is not earned, Eliana whispered. It is given so healing can begin. The cabin remained utterly still. Passengers absorbed every word, touched by a story unfolding far beyond the confines of the aircraft. Langford watched with tears glistening, realizing that what he learned from Eliana today would stay with him forever. Melanie covered her mouth, shaken by the power of forgiveness she never imagined witnessing in her lifetime. Martha wept silently, her chest swelling with pride for the woman she had come to admire more deeply than she could express. Eliana placed a hand lightly on the seat in front of Evans, grounding both herself and him. When we land, she said softly, we will face the truth together. Evan nodded, a quiet sob escaping him. For the first time in years, the shadow between them began to dissolve. The aircraft flew on through the night, carrying not just passengers, but healing, truth, and the fragile beginnings of redemption. The story of Dr. Eliana Grant is a clear testament to the power of courage, composure, and self-worth. When faced with racism and deep-seated prejudice, she did not let anger or injustice dictate her actions. Instead, she chose to stay calm, observe, and act intelligently, using the power of her position and knowledge to protect herself and educate those around her. This shows that in life, we always face challenging moments. When our rights, honor, or self-worth are threatened, choosing how to react not only affects you, but also creates a ripple effect on the surrounding community. Learning to stay calm, observe, analyze, and act strategically is an important lesson that everyone, especially adult audiences, can apply in their family, work, or social relationships. Another profound lesson is about facing the past, recognizing the mistakes of others and even forgiving when necessary. Inner strength, integrity, and the ability to stand up for justice not only helps you protect yourself, but also inspires others. Thank you for taking the time to follow this story. If you find the lessons and messages in the story valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to spread other inspirational stories. Let each of us be the one to spread strength and hope to those who need it.